So my father had this trait where he could pronounce with absolute certainty on like 1,000 different issues, many of which he may not have known much about, but he could still pronounce with absolute certainty. And I found this trait highly irritating. So I developed the habit, I think, by my 20s that I didn't trust him on anything because he would keep pronouncing on things where I thought his actual body of knowledge was quite shallow. So even though this caused me to not trust anything my father said on anything, I inherited this trait. And so I spent much of my life, pronouncing on things that I didn't know much about with absolute certainty. And people didn't appreciate that. Like people reacted really badly to that. Like people can become incandescent with rage if you are pronouncing on things that you don't know much about because you're running a con. And as I converted to Judaism, I found that every rabbi that I wanted to follow and attach myself to as a devoted follower, I would eventually realize that all these incredibly glib, charismatic teachers of Judaism, they were running some kind of con. Not in the sense of illegality, but they were just creating a feel-good presentation that wasn't true to the text, wasn't true to reality, but was a winner as far as attracting people and making money. So, for example, if you got a minority group, you can't go wrong by telling them, how much they've suffered at the hands of outsiders, right? If you work the victimology angle, pretty much every minority group likes to hear the victimology, and you can make a great living lecturing about the lessons of the Holocaust and lessons of Jewish suffering and how terribly Jews have suffered at the hands of outsiders. That's a very popular message. You can ride that to the bank. You can ride that to great success in Jewish life. That if you make the argument that Jewish problems are the fault of non-Jews, then you can just ride that to the bank. So I developed a distrust of the glib, right? Because someone who's trying to be honest to the text or honest to reality, they're going to have to circumscribe their remarks. They're going to have to circumcise their remarks. They're going to have to say, but in this case, this, though in the other case, X, or I really don't know much about Y. So I used to get a ton of criticism for pronouncing with absolute certainty on all sorts of things that I didn't know much about. Then as I've gotten older, I've become more careful about that. So I think if you're a regular viewer of my channel, you know I never graduated from college. Like I'm not an expert in almost anything. If I talk about Aristotle, I can't read Aristotle in Greek. If I talk about Maimonides, I can't read Maimonides in Arabic or Hebrew. If I talk about the Talmud, I can't read the Talmud in Aramaic or Hebrew. If I talk about the book of Daniel, I can't read Daniel in Hebrew or Aramaic, right? I think we all understand that. So by making it more clear when there are subjects that I don't know much about, then it kind of reduces the temperature. Like people are less incentivized to want to tear me down or rip me apart or retaliate against someone who's trying to run a con on them. So I don't get a lot of that criticism anymore. So for example, on yesterday's stream, I talked about a connection between playing violent video games and committing violent crimes. But I was really just reading what Lieutenant David Grossman wrote in his book on combat. This was not really so much my own unique opinions. I was just reading and sharing a book that I found persuasive. And no, I haven't studied the studies on violent video games, and people bring contrary studies up in the comments, and I'm not an expert. And when you let people No, that you understand you're not an expert when you start pronouncing on stuff with absolute authority on things that you don't know much about, then reduces people's incentives to hurt you. So I use this as an introduction. How can you know you're living in reality? And I think my favorite test for this is, are people gratuitously stepping on your toes? Are people constantly retaliating against you? I'm not talking about people accidentally stepping on your toes, but think about the analogy with driving. If you're driving around and people are constantly honking at you and flipping you off, you're probably doing some things wrong. So I majored in economics. I went to a junior college for 3 years, Sierra Community College in Rockland, California. And then I went for 1 year to UCLA. And then I had to drop out because of ill health, and I never got back. To my regret, because I intended in my early 20s to make a career of being an economics professor, but that didn't happen. But I love academics. I love the academic approach to life. I find pundits useless, right? All the professional pundits who appear on TV and write op-eds in the New York Times, LA Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, I find them useless. I much prefer the work of PhDs, professors, particularly those who teach at or graduated from elite universities. That's what my interest in. So I've been blessed with friendships with a lot of philosophers, meaning professional philosophers, people with PhDs in philosophy and working in that field. Philosophers, people who study philosophy at a graduate level, they have the highest verbal IQ scores of any discipline. And it's verbal IQ scores that make for success in life much more than visual spatial IQ scores. But I'm able to have friendships with philosophers because I don't pretend to know stuff that I don't know. And then they don't find it obnoxious talking to me because I'm not pretending to be an expert. I've got questions, I've got thoughts, sometimes I even have opinions, but because I'm not pronouncing, then they don't have an incentive to retaliate against me or to disdain me. They don't find my company obnoxious because I have an accurate sense of my own place in life, an accurate sense of my own abilities and importance. So how can you know if you have an accurate sense of your own abilities, an accurate sense of your own importance in the grand scheme of things? How can you know you're living in reality? Well, the same way if you drive and people aren't honking, people aren't cursing you out, people aren't flipping you off, generally speaking, then you're probably driving according to the rules of the road that are both written and unwritten. For example, if on a freeway everybody's going 80 miles an hour and you're being pedantic and you're driving 55, then a lot of people are going to get angry at you. They're going to flip you off and they're going to honk because you're not really obeying the unwritten laws of the road, which means keep up with traffic. So, as with driving in life, people aren't flipping you off, people aren't retaliating against you, people aren't deliberately stepping on your toes, so to speak. It's a good indicator that you are living in reality. And that means that you have an accurate sense of your own importance. So I've taken various online IQ tests, and I usually score in the 120s, though I have scored as low as 107. So a score in the 120s is not extraordinary. Okay, I know I'm not a genius. All right, and so that when I talk to people, I don't pretend to be a genius, and that reduces the tension level. That reduces their desire to retaliate against me because I'm not coming from a place of, I am the world's authority on Maimonides. I am the world's authority on psychometric IQ testing, right? So if you live a life around other people, where you're interacting with people, you're participating in community, you have friends, and it's relatively drama-free. That means you're living in reality and that you have an accurate sense of your own abilities and your own importance. Now, you may make a mistake and people may retaliate, or you may have done nothing wrong and people may retaliate because of their own nonsense. Speaking in generalities, like if you're going through life and you're gliding, if you feel like you're gliding through life, then you're probably in reality. You probably have an accurate sense of your own importance in the grand scheme of things. You probably have an accurate sense of your own abilities. You probably have an accurate sense of appropriate boundaries. And then life becomes a lot easier. Life becomes a lot more smooth. And people begin to enjoy your company. People look forward to seeing you. They invite you over. They want to do things with you. They want to participate in things that you engage in because you are rooted in reality. On the other hand, if people are dedicated to hurting you, people are dedicated to humiliating you, people are dedicated to reporting you, if people are dedicated to getting you fired, if people are dedicated to destroying your business, if people are going on a jihad against you, then you most likely don't have an accurate understanding of your place in the grand scheme of things. You probably don't have an accurate understanding of your strengths and weaknesses. You don't have an accurate understanding of what you're good at and what you're not so good at. And when it comes to getting a sponsor in a 12-step program, I think one should look at it as if you're getting a partner in a business. It kind of removes the emotion from the equation. So if you're going into business with someone, partner to partner, you'd want someone who's responsible, reliable, transparent, ethical, upstanding. So you really want these qualities in a sponsor or in a romantic partner or in a friend. So I think when we think with our business heads on, with our yarmulkes on, like approach some of these things as a business, we tend to make a lot better decisions. You don't want a drama queen as a sponsor or as a business partner or even as a friend. And when someone's a sponsor, it doesn't mean that they get an all-access pass to your life. Now, if you're working your 12-step program, then the program and God are going to get an all-access pass to your life. It's going to transform your life if you're doing it right. But you don't have to share anything with a sponsor that you don't want to share, right? And if you feel like they're getting off on your vulnerabilities, you may have the wrong sponsor for you. You don't have to share anything. Like if they give you an assignment talking about difficult parts of your life, you don't have to read them all of what you've written. You can share it with other people who are safe. You don't have to give anyone an all-access pass to your life, though, yeah, I'm in various 12-step programs, right? So you don't have to give anyone an all-access pass to your life. When you allow someone into your life, it's like downloading a program to your computer and installing it. And if you do that, you might be giving someone else access to everything on your computer. You might be blowing up your computer if it's a malicious program. So you want to be careful with the kind of, I'm a recovering addict, not for drugs and alcohol, but various emotional addictions, like porn. Used to be addicted to the porn. Well, once a porn addict, always a porn addict, but by the grace of God, I've been sober in that capacity for several years. So too, when you bring someone into your life, you are, opening yourself up for a potential for a lot of harm. So you want to use good judgment. That's why I think using thinking with your business head, is this someone, be a good partner in business? Is this someone who's ethical, transparent, responsible? And, use judicious sense in opening up. So I take a lot of 12-step phone calls, and people often want to talk about their problems, but I limit talk about problems to 2 minutes. Right after 2 minutes, we're talking about the solution. Okay, we're not going to talk about the problem endlessly. I'm not going to allow people to just drag me down. But let's talk about what the big book says. Let's talk about what 12 and 12 says. Let's talk about the steps. Let's talk about the tools in the program. Let's talk about the solution. The ultimate solution is God. Okay, that's the solution for an addict. Is God. 12 steps. Working the 12 steps. Remember, I was at a meeting about 13 years ago, a meeting organized by my synagogue, and we had a speaker who was a psychologist and Orthodox Jew, and I asked her, if you met a guy who was 40 years old and he'd never married, what would you immediately think? And she said, I'd immediately think that he had a fear of success and or a fear of failure. So that applies to me. I do have some fear of success. I do have some fear of failure. And when you have fears that are disproportionate to what they should be, it's going to cause you needless suffering, and it's going to make your life smaller. And you're going to be less of service to other people and to God. So what I've been writing about is, how does this say fear of success? How is this manifested in my life? How does this fear serve me? How does this fear hurt me? How does it hold me back? What would be like to live in the opposite of this fear, in faith, and love, and generosity? How would that expand my life? And then do the same for fear of failure, or fear of learning new technology, or fear of angry people, or fear of confrontation, or fear of being broke, or fear of retiring without a prudent reserve, or fear of getting sick, or fear of dying in an auto accident. Like, these are all fears that I've had that are out of proportion to reality. And so I just do that process I just mentioned, where I get clear about the extent of this fear. How has it served me? Like, what needs in me is this fear meeting? Then how would it serve me to be in the opposite of this fear? Faith. How would that benefit me? And so if there are things that I need to do in my life, if there are assignments that I'm missing, if there are parts of reality that I'm skimping on, if there are tasks that life is setting before me and I'm fleeing from them, then I do the same writing exercise. Okay, I'm avoiding task A. And why am I avoiding it? How does that serve me? How would it benefit me to actually get this task accomplished if I were in my character asset of faith instead of being in avoidance? So in every society, in all of human history, there have always been basic truths that you cannot say out loud publicly without suffering severe repercussions. So today is no different, it's no exception. There are all sorts of things you cannot say publicly that are blindingly obviously true. So, if you want to have a happy, smooth, successful life, you don't say them. You use humor, you use irony, you use analogies. There are all sorts of ways that you be careful about who you talk to, use good discretion, and that way you won't get yourself into trouble by saying things out loud which are just simply obvious truths that you're not allowed to say out loud. For example, YouTube has incredibly rigorous terms of service now. And so there are all sorts of things you can't say, but what you can do is use humor and irony and sarcasm and analogies. Now, you ask me, what does Judaism have to say that can help with the field of addiction? Well, guess what? I've been in 12-step programs for 8 years. And I've never once shared in a meeting or in an outreach call like Judaism's teachings on anything. Like, I just think it's inappropriate. It's an outside issue. So I never bring it into my 12-step programs. Like, I'll walk into a meeting with my yarmulke, but I never say the Torah says this, the Talmud says this, the Maimonides says this, Kabbalah says that. And I have friends in 12-step who go on and on about their religion. And one guy, after he did it like 40 times, I said, okay, enough. All right. It's an outside issue. I don't bring religion into my 12-step work. Judaism does have things to say about addiction, so does Christianity. I'm sure Islam, I'm sure many different religions do, but I just leave that outside the rooms. I don't bring it up in my shares. I've never once brought up any Jewish teaching in any of my 12-step shares. So it's outside issues, and I leave it out of the program. So things have a context. Things that you can bring up in one context are inappropriate to bring up in another context. So if I go into a 12-step meeting and start sharing what Judaism has to say about XYZ, it's outside material, it's outside literature, can unnecessarily alienate people. You don't need that. I don't bring up politics in 12-step meetings. I don't bring up religion. I stick to the topic at hand. So if I'm at a 12-step program about dating, I'm not going to talk about sex addiction. If I'm in a program for sex addiction, I'm not going to talk about under-earning. All right, so I try to respect boundaries, try to respect reality. That way I get to glide through life, and other people are less incentivized to hurt me. Yes, I've come across many atheists in 12-step programs. As long as you are able to believe in something greater than yourself, then you can participate in all good health and faith in a 12-step program. As long as you can find something greater than yourself, then that can be your higher power. It could be the meeting, it could be the program. So yeah, there are a lot of atheists in 12-step programs. So I'm comfortable with God. I'm comfortable with using God language. We all have our own different paths to higher power.